Thank you to the National AIDS Memorial speakers and partners supporting this year's program. This further inspires us to continue our collaborations towards strengthening health systems, ensuring equitable access, and improving quality of care. Hello, I'm Huma Abbasi, General Manager, Health and Medical at Chevron. This memorial and those like it are more than important landmarks and physical gathering spaces. They are teaching tools and symbols of loss and of remembrance, and also symbols of hope and solidarity. More than ever, they represent a commitment toward public health improvements and community prosperity. The AIDS Memorial Quilt is a powerful symbol that continues to teach us through its history, stories, and programs. We have also seen these platforms and learnings applied to and have been so valuable during the current pandemic. At Chevron, I'm proud to say we also have a very rich history of supporting our community partners and neighbors, as well as engaging in workforce activities that aim to educate, recognize, and continuously inspire. Our own company memorial quilt began in 1993 when a group of employees began marking blocks to commemorate Chevron employees whose lives were lost to AIDS. Since then, hundreds of employees and retirees from across the globe have produced over 20 company quilts, each having their own unique message and story of hope and partnership. I want to conclude by encouraging each one of us to support, advocate, or contribute to the efforts we are hearing about today, or a public health initiative that is meaningful for you. As you will hear today, we can achieve so much when we join others around the globe around common goals and giving back to our communities, colleagues, and families. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Anthea Hartig, the Elizabeth MacMillan Director of your National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian Institution. I'm here in the greater Washington, D.C. area, and thus give my lasting gratitude to the Piscataway, Nacotchtank, and Pamunkey tribes and all of their descendants and all of the Native peoples who still live and work in this land. Wherever you are, join me in giving thanks to our First Peoples. It's truly an honor and a humbling gift to be with you today on World AIDS Day. This conversation is hosted by the National AIDS Memorial, and it will plumb the ways in which we love and grieve, and the ways in which we remember, and the ways in which we weave into our national fabric of memory the tragedies around the AIDS crises, 9/11, and currently the pandemic caused by COVID-19. I'm so honored to be with three incredible fellow travelers today. Suzanne Brennan Firstenberg, creator of In America, Remember. Anthoula Katsimatides, founding member of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And John Cunningham, CEO of National AIDS Memorial. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I hope you and yours are as well as possible in these times. We gather, of course, today on World AIDS Day. We are 4 decades into the AIDS pandemic, and it is still, I think, with pain and gravity in our hearts, but also with love and hope that we remember and honor so many who have died of AIDS. We, of course, look hopefully into the future as we collectively work towards a cure for HIV/AIDS. And we'll, of course, be positioning this today as the longer chapter of the 3 we're discussing. The way in which, of course, AIDS has transformed, I think, compassion, science, our attitudes, how it's challenged homophobia, how it's challenged the very way in which we understand each other, are lasting. And through some of the darkest days early in the pandemic, the kind of the miracle that came forth of remembrance, whether it be at the AIDS Memorial Grove in San Francisco and Golden Gate Park, or the incredible inspiration to stitch a quilt square by square as a form of both protest and as a form of remembrance. Like then, And like 9/11 and like COVID, we've come together to grieve and to heal and to honor and to mostly, of course, remember. So today we're going to talk about memorials and remembering and grieving and the interwoven and interconnectedness of how art, memory, hope, care, fear, anger, despair, all can be presented in ways that help us live, help us continue, and of course, help us keep close all those we've lost. Memory is, of course, also about that long arc of never remembering, about finding immortality in telling the stories of those we've lost to keep them alive for our next generations. So whether we do that through an artistic expression, through a special time together in community, the projection of hope, if you will, into the future is one I think to which we all cling. So as we think about especially the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, it seems kind of also kind of layeredly complex that was this year as well in 2021. As we think about month 21 into the global COVID-19 pandemic, we're bringing together three incredible people who I think can really help us understand the ways in which we remember. So I'd like to start, John, with you as you think about the way in which both the AIDS Memorial and the Grove, as well as the quilt, both came about, and then what role they served at the time as when they came into being, and what role they've continued to serve.
Well, thank you, Anthea and Anthoula and Suzanne for joining us today on World AIDS Day. It's an honor to be with all of you as true inspiring leaders. The AIDS Memorial Grove, which is the 10-acre memorial at Golden Gate Park, this is our 30th anniversary. Next year in 2022, it will be the 35th anniversary of the creation of the quilt. And we are this year in 2021, reflecting back on 40 years of the AIDS crisis. The interesting thing is the three of our projects all were very close in time. And in our case, as well as in the 9/11, as well as in COVID, we're in the middle of what you're memorializing. We're still in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and we're still in the middle of the COVID crisis. And the 9/11 memorial was right on the heels of what happened, which is unique, I believe, to some of the memorial creation. When I look at the AIDS Memorial Grove first, when it was created, it was obviously 10 years into the epidemic. The city of San Francisco had lost over 10,000 individuals in that period, and there was just a dark cloud of grief hanging over the city. And it was an opportunity for the citizens and the community to gather and to figure out a way to not only remember those lost that were being forgotten day by day, but then also to come together and create something together. And in so doing, as I like to say, that the healing was happening on either side of the shovel. In the first 6 months of the memorial being created, there were over 50 dump truck loads of debris and brush taken out of a derelict space. Over the last 30 years, over 250,000 volunteer hours have been dedicated to the Grove, and another 250,000 to the quilt. So over 500,000 volunteer hours. So we truly engaged a community that was seeking to heal. When Cleve speaks of the quilt and the power of what it was doing, keep in mind there was no internet, there was no social media, there was none of that. And in the first several months when this project of creating a quilt was created, thousands of panels were arriving at the post office in San Francisco from around the country, from mothers and friends and lovers. Literally, the postmaster at the local post office called and said, "I don't know what's going on, but get over here because you got to get this out of my room." It shows the power of a community and a nation that was desiring to heal. But it was so much more than that for Cleve. The Grove is a solace place of remembrance and quiet and reflection, contemplation. And the quilt was truly an activist tool. As Cleve says, we brought the quilt to the front lawn of America and laid our dead so that they could not look away and neglect any longer. And I think that is the power of what we do at the National AIDS Memorial with both of these projects, is to ensure a nation never forgets.
Mm-hmm.
that's how we could most effectively, appropriately honor those that we remember.
Yeah, that's beautiful, John. Thank you. And so powerful too. I'm going to skip ahead to the current crisis, ask Suzanne my next question, and then Anthoula, I'd like to ground kind of in the middle space, if you will, the ongoing memorialization, both at the museum and, of course, through time for 9/11. Suzanne, when you opened in America on the 17th of September this year, it was the largest kind of homegrown crowdsource, as we would call it now, memorial on the National Mall since the AIDS quilt. And if you could maybe share a bit about your project, your process, the very act of grieving and remembering simultaneously with the pandemic, which we all are hoping will become an endemic soon, but as you know, is not.
As John says, it's so important to have that affiliative response. And we too utilized a lot of volunteers to bring this art to the National Mall. Having seen the AIDS quilt on the mall, having known that it was there and how it made the mall sacred space, it was really an honor for me as an artist to then bring this art, the white flags, to the National Mall as well. Taking this grandest stage in America and changing it into a place of quiet reverence and honoring those whom we have lost in this national space was really important. People have asked me, why did I do this in Washington, D.C.? There could be no better place than to stop the nation in those moments that the art was there on the mall, to have everyone reflect on all that we had lost and to give people a chance to think about, like, how did this happen? It really strikes me that had we really learned from what happened with AIDS, we might have had a different response to this.
Right. Yeah. And Dr. Fauci and so many who have lived through the multiple crises, right, who've lived through the long arc, the last 40 plus years, I think would concur. Certainly in our conversations with him, he has. And that place, of course, the very layered and complex landscape of the National Mall, of course, is our front yard at the National Museum of American History. And it's no surprise to me, and I'm deeply honored because Secretary Lonnie Bunch has asked our museum to help really think through and lead through the Smithsonian and our COVID response for lowercase memorialization, kind of lowercase commemoration. But it's no surprise that the museum and the curators started collecting what we call kind of a rapid response, right, to what's happening now 40, 50 years ago. When you think about the very history happening outside and the ways in which we do that. So we have deep collections, both in HIV/AIDS. We were honored to collect from you, Suzanne, for the first installation you did, and to be with you so many days on the second one. And then Anthoula, as you probably know, Congress authorized the Smithsonian and the American History Museum to also collect around the horrifying day and aftermath and ongoing issues surrounding 9/11. So help us kind of maybe piece that together a bit. And as you think about the work that you've done and as you helped establish the 9/11 Memorial and Museum and kind of taking us through to today, to World AIDS Day on the 1st of December.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthea. It's really an honor to be here with all of you today, and my heart goes out to all the families who lost their loved ones from AIDS. I just want to say that I think what makes me different is not only am I a founding member and serve on the board of directors for the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, but I too lost my brother John Katsimatides on September 11th. So this is very personal, obviously, for me. And at the time, 20 years ago, emotions were obviously heightened, and people were grappling with so much loss and so much pain. And the one sort of consensus that we could all come to was that we pledged to commemorate and remember and rebuild, vowing never to forget the loved ones. The other difference is that the site of our memorial is the actual site of the tragedy. So it is a sacred space. So we needed, very importantly, to treat it as such. So as our nation reeled in shock, as we struggled with this, it was the largest loss resulting from a foreign attack on American soil and the greatest loss of rescue personnel in any event in American history. We needed to make sure that this memorial that we build was not only there to honor and remember my brother and the thousands of those people who died that day, but also to make it a place of pilgrimage, if you will, and comfort. And I'm happy to say that is exactly, I think, what we've created. It is a refuge for remembrance that serves not just victims' family members, but also the survivors, the responders, the recovery and relief workers. It serves the neighborhood because it's now intricately woven into the fabric of Manhattan. It was not an easy task to build, but I have to say that my favorite part about the memorial, which is the two reflecting pools above ground, is in fact the life-affirming elements that contribute to our memorial, right? We have the rushing sound of the water. It's open to the sky, the beautiful, blue sky above us. We have all these beautiful canopies of trees that change and depending on the season. So while people come to obviously offer their support, they are also, I find, they leave with a sense of hope, which was monumental for the creators of the memorial. And then we have the museum, which I'd like to also, obviously it's part of the memorial because the museum is what tells the story. Because not only do we tell the story of how our loved ones lived, but we also talk about how they died, which is crucial, right? I mean, and it's what you said, Suzanne, we're not sugarcoating anything, right? We need to let the world know what happened. And 20 years later, we've discovered that our mission is so much more focused on educating the younger generation about what happened on that day. And I think that is kind of something that the three of us have to deal with, all of us have to deal with, is educating, the future generations about what happened so that they learn and hopefully history doesn't repeat itself. And also to never forget. I'm so grateful to know that the memorial and the museum exist. And I often call it a repository of my brother John's memory, because when I'm long gone, that is the only place that will say his name, that will, reflect what happened on that day so that other generations learn about John and the thousands of people that died that day. And it is sort of a fluid memorial because, as we all know, in the 20 years, unfortunately, so many people died from 9/11 related disease, right? So in order to recognize those tens of thousands of people, we had to build upon the memorial that we had and create something called a memorial glade, which is an addition to our memorial to help reflect that tragedy, and we continue to focus on those kinds of things. And of course, our institution helps other tragic occurrences that happen around the country and around the world. We're here to help those people and guide them in terms of memorials and remembrance.
Thank you so much. And of course, my ongoing condolences for the loss of your brother. I think each of our responses is rooted in loss, and so much of it is personal. So much of it is communal and societal. I'd like to go through. There's so many wonderful things you've all said. I want to go back a bit to think about the ways in which now 40 years into the AIDS HIV pandemic, the sense of community that's formed. And Anthoula, what you just said about your being there to help others also kind of understand, process, memorialize, commemorate, is I think is exacerbated and then enacted really by our missions of education, if I could put it in a really big kind of broader umbrella of a mission-based education so that people both don't forget and help us remember together, but also looking forward to the future, creating what our new mission at the museum is, which is creating a more just and compassionate future by preserving and understanding and sharing those stories and the complexities of the past. So when each of you think about the educational mission, and it can be in the most broadest sense, or it can be in a more specific sense, John, maybe reflect on kind of how this moment in 2021 continues our educational efforts, and also what are the challenges to our capacity and to our desires to educate, especially as Anthoula said, the next generations who are not alive for a lot of this.
It's a great question. And, I think that at the root also of what we do at the National AIDS Memorial, both the quilt and the Grove itself, is we're committed that never again will a community be harmed as a result of stigma, prejudice, discrimination, and otherism.
Yeah.
And that plays out for both of the other projects that are on this conversation, because it is about otherism. It's about looking at people differently. And when you do that, you have the capability to devalue that life. And therefore, it's much easier to neglect that life. And we as a society, I believe, owe it to the future generations to share those stories. The stories of the terrorists and what they were doing, and the tragedy that they inflicted. What we're going through with COVID right now. We as an educational base have a responsibility to ensure that we pass those stories on. Because we're all looking at stories that are beyond the individual loss of the names that are engraved in stone or represented by a flag. Those are important, but all those names have stories behind them. But then the tragedies that we three and others are telling the story on are much deeper and societal. Mm-hmm. And that's really, I think, the difference between our project and our projects and, let's say, a war memorial, which is important, but ours are really looking at the societal underpinnings of the lessons that need to be shared. So I think that, as the 9/11 Memorial and Museum has done, is how do you leverage the loss into an educational space? And for us, now we all have the benefit of social media. We can start going down that route. We as an organization at the National AIDS Memorial committed to telling the story, because at the intersection of the AIDS crisis sat so many different social movements, whether that be women, whether that be access to healthcare, whether that be poverty, whether that be LGBT, whether that be homelessness, whether that be substance use. All of those intersected in this one crisis. So we feel we have standing to tell that story. And so we're committed to looking at the creation of a space that will allow that to happen. Because long after I'm gone, as a man living with AIDS for well over 2 decades, I must know and be assured that what I've gone through and what our society went through and continues to go through will not be repeated. And we know going through that what we are going through right now with COVID, it is to a great degree being repeated because we've stigmatized it. And we've had a government that chose not to respond. And that's tragic. And I think it's a matter of turning this into activism as well as education.
I love what you're saying about as we say their names, which is so critical, right? Each of your projects, and each really of so many memorials, is about naming and about giving both the name, but I think what we're also doing is also then telling the story behind them and simultaneously acknowledging the huge disparity in experience of how we live through crisis like this. So much of our work, and I know Anthoula, yours at the Memorial and Museum, is now looking 20 years later about the full spectrum. What was happening, to Asian Americans who were living and working, to Latinos and Latinas who were serving so many people and doing so many different jobs, especially that very morning. But Suzanne, I know I was going to ask you about kind of thinking about both some of the things that John just said, as well as kind of giving name and giving voice, and then giving an opportunity for loved ones to grieve.
John, when you talk about the devaluation of individuals, that's really what caused me to create the art I did on the National Mall in the first place. It was the devaluation of lives of the elderly when people suggested that the elderly should be willing to take the risk of the COVID-19 virus so that our economy wouldn't suffer. And then it was a devaluation of lives of color when we realized that these were communities that were being disproportionately affected because of job and health disparities. And yet people wanted to just move on. And that's why I had to plant one white flag for each person who had died to date from this virus, because when we as a society start devaluing groups of people, society crumbles. And so I think when you say we have to be careful about devaluing lives, that's really at issue here with all of these memorials. Recognizing individuals is truly important, because when we do that in mass, as all three of us have with these various memorials, we say something about society. We declare that we have to value each individual. And as I did with In America, Remember, I gave the nation a moment to stop and think about how this could be happening and what we need to change. And that's one of the things in the memorial process when, Anthoula, you're talking about education, to educate about COVID-19 and this pandemic, we really do have to do a deeper dive into how did this happen and what do we need to change so that we never let it happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Suzanne. Anthoula, as this year marked the 20th anniversary, as we know, of 9/11, talk with us a bit and share with those who we're so grateful for joining us today about the ways in which you've seen kind of echoes of what you lived through, of course, that long day on the 11th of September in 2001, and then what people are living through now, whether it be with COVID or John, I'll ask you the same question as a man living with HIV. Kind of how are you kind of playing that forward, and how have you seen the echoes of the past tragedy, ongoing commemoration, and now layered in with this crisis?
People often talk about, and I'm sure, John, you hear this a lot too. Oh, it's been 40 years, or it's been
20 years.
Yeah. And so it's very difficult when such a large amount of time has passed for people to kind of understand the pain that still lies deep within, right? And I think that's the case for anyone suffering any kind of loss, right? But when there is a loss of such magnitude, a shared loss, as the AIDS crisis, as the pandemic, as 9/11 has shown us, it is so important. It's actually the burden, if you will, of being able to help people process that so many years later is greater. The task is greater for all of us, right? So I think that as a 9/11 memorial and museum, we're committed, obviously, to providing, relevant and ongoing kind of learning opportunities for not just the general public, but for students, for teachers, for families, to be able to engage. And John, yes, you're right about the importance of social media in that realm, but also, online resources are incredibly important. Webinars are incredibly important. Anthea, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but we have to deepen the public's understanding of each of our events that impacted America and the world. And we can do that in so many different ways now.
Right.
Because of technology, whether it's moderated conversations or art, installations or film screenings or performances. It is crucial to continue the conversation, because we will continue. We always say that we don't want to repeat what has happened, but there will always be some kind of an epidemic, a pandemic, a tragedy that will need, the people before who have already suffered this kind of thing to help them get through it. It's unfortunate, but there will always
giving them the tools. Yeah. No, I like what you're saying too. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. About making sure through our work, through the multiple ways in which all three of you and the organizations and the artistry that you bring to this conversation, that we give people the tools to have the conversation, that we give people the spaces to grieve, we give people the opportunity to remember so that they can then play it forward, right? So that they can work in ways together and form those communities of care, communities of concern, or communities of science, right? And belief in science, as well as, co-joined with empathy and compassion, and the care that we give each other, which I think is in these times of cascading crises, viral, racial, economic, constitutional, political, global crises, and then all in the big shadow, of course, of the climate crisis. I think giving people the opportunity to find hope is essential, but the tools with which we then can help give them that kind of hope toolkits, if you will, right? Because through our grief, right, we remember. Through our grief, we come together in memory. So there's a couple more questions, and I could talk to you guys all day, but I know we're part of a much bigger day and a much bigger set of remembrances. So John, on World AIDS Day, as we look back, I'm going to ask each of you kind of what message would you each leave about the future to our viewers and participants. So I'll start with you, John. As we look back, what message would you leave our viewers about the future?
Well, 40 years into it, we never, first of all, thought we would be sitting here without a cure or a vaccine. And I think I would be remiss if I did not call out the research, the work that was done in the AIDS crisis over the last 40 years that helped to provide the mRNA and the vaccines for those that are surviving with COVID today, and that are taking the vaccination to take the bigger step of protecting their society. Because I think it's important that we all remember that public health has the word public in it, that it's not my health, it's our health. And we all need to stand up and take the responsibility for each other. As I sit here and we call back, we get panels of the quilt every day. They're still coming in. Some of the panels come in from the nephews or nieces of lost uncles, perhaps, that the parents couldn't make a panel. They never came to the place of accepting who their son was, and they didn't. But these nieces and nephews may never have met him, but they're making them. In other situations, when the parents have aged out and gone to the other side, there are panels that are being found in closets that were created by parents, but the love that was put in, they couldn't let them go because it was the final act. And then there's just panels that come in on a constant basis. So I think that both the Grove and the quilt show the power of where individuals coming together, communities coming together, whether that be to plant lavender or whether that be to stitch a quilt. It is an act. How do we bring together communities in that process? Because if we do not realize that it is about community, then we're all alone. I can hearken back to when we were completely forgotten and neglected in the early days of the epidemic. We were left to our own devices. We were waiting for the ambulance to come in the form of a public response, and it was clear that no public response was coming. And that's what created the San Francisco model of care, which in the first decade was over 50 nonprofits cropped up to serve those in need because the government wasn't coming. That model is used now around the world. So I think that as I hearken back and look at today, it's not only those that have lost, but I want to call out and I want to acknowledge long-term survivors, because we must realize that they already went through and are continuing to go through a war. They are living with PTSD. When they step out of their home, perhaps that they've lived in for 30 or 40 years, how can they not remember the death that was on their doorsteps? And so the long-term survivor syndrome is real. PTSD is real. And I want to call out their names as well as those that we've lost. So I think it's important as we look to the future to realize how as a community we can support each other, how as a society we tell the stories to the future. And because we also have 9/11 represented on this, I would be remiss if I did not speak aloud the name of my college friend, Mark Bingham, who was on Flight 93. So I just wanted to wrap that part up there. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you for sharing that and for reminding us too of the ongoing both psychic, psychological, sociological trauma, as well as how people came together. You're right, that model of care and that creating of community. And we'll remember Mark and so many together as well.
Well, if I could just piggyback on that, Anthea,
you were going to be next, my friend.
It's so true. The concept of community and care that happens in the aftermath of a tragedy is mind-blowing. You know, I obviously often speak of my brother and 9/11 and what happened on that day. But when I look back 20 years, I find myself thinking about September 12th and what happened after September 12th, when thousands of people, you know, came together with an unlimited amount of kindness that just kept pouring in to all family members, you know, from friends and families and strangers alike. And it seemed like the whole country kind of put their arms around us, right? So that is what gave me the strength, you know, to kind of get through the days and weeks following 9/11 and realizing that all this kindness and this giving is what was going to help me get through, because John was all about kindness and giving and love, right? As all of our loved ones who passed away so tragically. And so we have to remember that we're all connected in that way. And it takes you a long time to kind of figure it out. But when you have people rooting for you and helping you, you know, it not only helps you get through that tragedy, but 20 years later, you realize that you are almost better for it because you've developed this, you know, wonderful sense of community and love and compassion that you have found, you know, as a result.
Yeah. That helps undergird you and lift you up when you're low. Yeah. Suzanne, your kind of collective embrace of such a magnitude of loss. Right now, I was on the day where we helped Suzanne change the number 6 in the 100,000 spot to 7. And of course, we're well over 700,000 lost recorded losses, which, you know, the number is probably higher. Suzanne, close out with us kind of both how you're thinking about the future when you're so immersed, as we all are, but you even more so, with the present, and what words would you like to share with our viewers?
I think the through line here is community. Just as John and Anthoula have mentioned, community is what's going to give us hope in the future. And community is one of the things that we can draw and build on from these crises. Just a quick story for you. There was a woman who planted a flag. She wrote out a flag and planted it for her mother, whom she had lost just a couple of months prior. After planting the flag, she got down on the ground to take a picture of it. She was so overwhelmed with grief that she just put her head down and cried for a few minutes. But when she was getting up, she noticed a stranger very close to her. He had put down his bike and just finished planting a flag of his own. And he looked at her and he said, "Do you need a hug?" And she said, rising to her feet, "Yeah." In that moment, she needed a hug. And she got a wonderful big hug from this complete stranger. We had so many strangers consoling others because in that space we created on the National Mall, there wasn't a space for Democrats or Republicans or one race or another. We were all one in suffering this grief. And so strangers honored strangers. And that's what we have to do to knit community together. I say to people, if you're over the age of 10, you can stop worrying about stranger danger and start thinking about others as individuals who have the same emotional needs and relational ties to other people, and start putting yourself in their shoes. And so at the opening and closing events for In America Remember, I just said to people, let's learn how to talk to and honor strangers. And that's when we'll really get out of our echo chambers and knit community together.
Yeah, thank you for that. Beautiful. And especially since you are literally surrounded with the flags coming to us from your, I'm guessing from your studio.
Yes, there are over 16,000 dedicated flags that we are archiving here.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thanks to each of you, your work, your heartfelt stories, your inspirational activism, your impact on history. As a historian, I can assure you that that it is such, right? That you've helped change the very way in which we remember, which we memorialize, how we care, how we love, and how we grieve. And I'm so grateful for this conversation and have been a small part of it. And these, as we've all mentioned, are critical conversations to our nation and to our world. Through this work, whether it be the AIDS Memorial, 9/11 Memorial Museum, or through the now 2 installations that Suzanne has done in Washington, D.C., but then, of course, digitally across time and space, we remember and we help people understand, and we can grieve as we build connections, community, and I hope bridges to understanding. And of course, that we do this all together on World AIDS Day is incredibly poignant and lasting and memorable. So I want to thank each of you, Suzanne, Anthoula, and John, and then of course John too, and so many who have put this day forward for us to learn, to come into community, and to grow and to heal and to never forget. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take good care.